let's just say somebody's regenerated and then they die right before they believe. Do they go to heaven?
Hey Scott, I did a Google search to try and find some suggestions on how to accomplish something.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to give you the suggestions that Google gave me
Okay.
on how to accomplish this thing.
Okay.
You tell me the thing that I'm trying to accomplish.
Okay.
All right?
All right.
All right.
Very good.
Here are the suggestions from Google. Coconut oil, aloe vera, exfoliate, hydrate, and finally, short, lukewarm showers that finish with a cold water rinse. What was I trying to achieve?
Really great skincare.
Yes, a radiant complexion
There we go.
or glowing skin.
With the first two, I'd have said a burn. But when you went to exfoliate, I thought, no, not that.
Yeah. So glowing skin was what I was trying to
Yeah.
accomplish. And frankly, by the looks of it, I think your showers are a little too hot.
Okay. I'm gonna have to make that adjustment.
That is the senior pastor of East White Oak Bible Church, Scott Burkle. My name is Craig Whitaker, and this is the Ask Scott podcast. Scott, of course, you were preaching on Sunday from chapter 3 of 2 Corinthians.
Yes.
Verses 7 through 16. And there was some talk about Moses in this section and his glowing face.
Yeah.
That's why the radiant skin.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
All right. I thought it was maybe just to confront me publicly with my skincare habits.
No. So there was at least one question about Moses and his glowing face.
Yes.
Shall we jump into the questions?
Let's go for it.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
The first question, though, is about the Old Covenant. What Paul is talking about is this comparison between an Old Covenant and a New Covenant.
Yeah.
And when we think of the Old Covenant, we think largely of the Ten Commandments.
And certainly Paul is referring to that here by talking about the law written in stone.
Yep. Yeah. So the question is, what are the Ten Commandments for Christians?
Mm-hmm.
Are they rules to live by, or are they something other than that?
Yeah. So I want to say several things all at once, and I can't say them all at once. As a means to be justified before God, which is what Paul is talking about here, they just bring death. And so we need to be careful to say that first. But then, as revelation from God for how human beings ought to live, they are authoritative, helpful, all of those things. There is some challenge with the Ten Commandments, actually, with commandment number 4, depending on, Catholics and Protestants and Jews all count the Ten Commandments differently. Even though they have the same Ten Commandments, the numbers change, which is a fascinating study. I commend our listeners to that. Remember, the Sabbath day is not repeated in the New Testament. And so many, myself included, suggest that there may be something special about that in terms of how we translate that into the New Covenant. Probably not in the same way as don't steal. So, yeah.
Good. Moses' face gave it away that he had spent time with God.
Yes.
Should our faces as Christians give evidence to people that we come into contact with that we have a relationship with God? Maybe not glowing, but anything about our face?
Yeah. I don't know that it's certainly not like the fruit of the Spirit, right? But I think that there is something to be said for a believer who's so settled in their faith that their face actually reflects the settledness of their faith. And I've heard many stories of people who get asked, what is going on in your life? You seem so peaceful, and it is because they're a Christian that's really walking with the Lord. So while I would not make it a requirement, I would say that it certainly is sometimes an evidence of our faith.
Before we move away from Moses and his shiny face, Is there any reason to think that Moses wore a veil for the rest of his life?
Yeah. GotQuestions.org actually addresses this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you haven't ever been to GotQuestions.org, you can ask a whole bunch of questions, and it's a evangelical website with very sound theology that answers a whole bunch of different questions on subjects.
Well, what'd you find out?
Yeah. So, well, the veil came when he went up to meet with God, and then when he came down. The idea is that there's no statement in the Bible to say that it faded or that he stopped wearing the veil. But neither is there a statement that he kept wearing it.
Yeah.
And we get the idea that as time went on, it faded and he no longer wore the veil.
Okay. All right. There's an interesting phrase in the section that you preached on Sunday that says, their minds were hardened.
Yeah.
Referring to people who have rejected the new covenant and were still relying upon the old covenant. Their minds were hardened. And that sounds like a passive thing, something that was done to them.
Yeah.
Now, if that's the case, if it was in fact passive, it's not their fault then, right? That they haven't received or accepted this new covenant?
Yeah, so Romans chapter 1 is helpful. Romans chapter 9 is helpful here. In Romans 9, it talks about Pharaoh's heart was hardened, but it also says that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. So there's a both and going on. Romans 1:21 is super helpful here. It says, although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, neither were they thankful, but became foolish in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. So they were doing it, and God was doing it. So both are happening at the same time. And I think there is something that is a bit of a compounding thing that happens there. We can argue, I suppose, about which happens first, but it seems to me a fruitless debate to say you're making wrong choices and then God adds to your blindness by a darkening of your ability to see. But the point being that you need to avoid that and run toward the Lord rather than run away from him.
One of the points that's made in the passage is that there is a greater glory that comes with the new covenant over the old covenant. And what this produces in the life of those that have trusted in this new thing is a boldness in their ministry.
That's right.
What are some characteristics of a bold ministry? What would that look like?
Yeah. I think being much more affectionate toward what God thinks about us than what people think, but not being anti-people. There are some people that they feel like they're so close to God that they can just criticize everybody. That's not what's being talked about here. It's rather an openness to engage people, to be joyous, to be unashamed, to be free, to simply serve the Lord with a purity of heart, rather than some hidden agenda or something in mind or, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think there's a rejoicing that's involved in boldness too. I don't think that it's a personality trait. In other words, I don't think that Paul is saying you become an extrovert, because sometimes we attach, personality traits to these kinds of adjectives, and I don't think that's the case. I think you can be an introvert and be bold.
Yeah. Verse 16 suggests that there is a sequence to coming to know Jesus, or a sequence to placing your faith in this new covenant. And the sequence, as it's outlined here in verse 16, is step 1, turn to the Lord.
Yes.
Step 2, the veil is removed.
Yes.
This sequence seems to not align very well with a reformed understanding of salvation. So help us to understand the proper sequence or order of salvation. What happens and in what sequence does it happen?
Yeah. So this is a little inside baseball. So it's it can get into a pretty heavy subject in relating to the order of salvation. One is the question, is the order of chronological sequence. The other is the order in the mind of God, what theologians call the Ordo Salutis. And those are two different things. The Reformed wing of Christianity tends to spend a lot of time thinking about the order of salvation in the mind of God rather than the order in which it actually happens. And so their reasoning is that if we are spiritually dead, we have to be made alive in order to believe. In other words, regeneration precedes faith. Okay? I reject that notion as a chronological thing, and indeed many Reformed people also reject that. They understand it as a logical category rather than a chronological category. That's how I look at it too. The reason is that, let's just say somebody's regenerated and then they die right before they believe. Do they go to heaven? The point of the argument of my stating that is simply to say that there is, if you look at it chronologically, the possibility of a person being regenerate but not possessing faith in Christ. That's just something that's unknown in the Bible. So I would reject the idea of regeneration preceding faith as a chronological perspective. Indeed, this text gives evidence to my view that if we're looking at it chronologically, it is exactly as you've stated here. That you have a person who turns to the Lord and then the veil is removed. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
It's an interesting subject, and people will hotly debate this. And I think we need to be cautious about trying to make too much of things that aren't ours. The mind of God.
Yeah.
There's some very beautiful things that can come from that. But when it starts to get a little testy, that's when we need to be cautious and back away from our, the hair on the back of our neck rising.
That'll do it for this episode of the Ask Scott podcast. Thank you for joining us. If you found the episode interesting or encouraging in any way, it would be an encouragement to us if you would click the like and subscribe buttons. You can always find previous episodes of the Ask Scott podcast on our YouTube channel. Just search at East White Oak. You can follow East White Oak Bible Church on Facebook and Instagram. We look forward to you joining us the next time Pastor Scott answers your questions about the Bible on the Ask Scott podcast.